Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Rise of the GM. Today we're going to be talking about a tale of dueling wives. We're going to talk about a power-hungry jester, and we're going to get into our last session on planning the individual session. Stick with us here on Rise of the GM. Well, hey everybody, welcome back. We had our Thanksgiving feast, spectacular last week, and in the middle of our planning series. So we have our 3-part series going on. We started with planning the campaign, like getting the initial thoughts and like the whole thing down kind of on paper and beginning that process. Then we went to the arc, how to do individual arcs. And today we're going to finish up with, what do you do when you're planning an individual session? You're getting ready for the game tonight. What do you do in getting ready for that? So we're going to talk about that and more. But Adam, how has your week been before we get started here?
Hey, not too bad. It's felt long. I feel like doing this podcast is kind of like a checkpoint in my week. And since we did that on that Monday, it's like felt like it stretched out a bunch, but it was good to have kind of a lower key week last week. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. And I hope everybody here had a really good Thanksgiving week. I was sick all week. I was thankful for being sick and having to go places every other day. No, so if in the middle of this podcast, you see me silently over here coughing, it's because I've muted my mic and I'm just continuing that coughing spree that is still going on, but we will get through this. We're going to start today with our encounter starter. Again, we like to have like these little encounter ideas to throw out to you guys. Again, all coming from that Gnome Stew book, Eureka. Check that out if you haven't. 501 great adventure plots to inspire game masters. But we're looking at one called Too Much of a Good Thing today. And boy, is it. This is one where years ago, there was a narcissistic adventurer, a woman who married a nobleman, used his fortune and standing to further her career as an adventurer, right? And when she was later lost at sea and presumed dead, the noble was devastated. So evidently he really loved her, even though she was using him for his money to further her own career. So sparing no expense, he hired artisans to craft a perfect it's always a fun one for me to say, simulacrum, right? Did I say that correctly?
I think so.
Adam has to look at it and think about it also.
I try not to say that word.
We've used this a lot. I used to have a guy who pours chemicals.
Yeah, alchemist.
Alchemist. I used to have an alchemist who would make simulacrums. And I had to say that all the time because I was always making them, but I never have gotten used to that word. Anyway, he had artisans craft a perfect simulacrum, if you know a better way to pronounce that, you can just say it in your head, of his dead wife, right? So he had this living thing created just like her. Then she unexpectedly returns home alive and well, and both she and the replacement, the simulacrum, were outraged. The distraught husband convinced them to enter into this smoldering truce until a solution could be found. And since that time, 2 servants have disappeared. The house steward, the one in charge of the servants, fearing the worst, has written now to the PCs asking for help. So he's taking this upon himself. This is not like the nobleman. This is not the adventurer. This is not the simulacrum that's asking for help. This is like the steward of the house. When the PCs arrive, their host and the 2 wives, they're polite, but they're very self-absorbed with what's going on in their relationship. They only see the PCs at dinner each night. The noble's happy to listen to any suggestions they have, but each wife will reject any solution that reduces her claim to the fortune or puts her influence at stake. During these meals, the PCs may realize that the animosity between the wives is mostly an act. Okay, so that's something you can kind of show a little bit in their actions. The steward is suspicious of the wife's claims that they discovered the missing servant stealing and then discharged him, which is what they've claimed. He considered the servants trustworthy, so he doesn't believe him here. The PCs search, if they decide to search, find no witnesses to the servant's departure, but there are signs of a violent struggle outside of one of the wives' rooms. Okay, the wives refuse to let their rooms be searched, and if the noble is brought into this, he'll back them up. So the PCs have to find a time when either they're not there to snoop around or to follow them, right? So dinner time is a good option. They can shadow them and wait for another opportunity if dinner doesn't work out. But shadowing them will reveal that the wives spend most of their time alone in their rooms. And so they have to find a way to get the wives out of the rooms. Maybe it's the dinner time. But for several hours a night, one will visit with the other. One of the suites is unremarkable if they go into it. It's a lavishly decorated guest room. Okay, so it's still just a guest room. The other, though, is an opulent ladies' suite, but a careful search will reveal that there's a secret staircase leading down to a long unused dungeon. And there, guarded by summoned monsters and the undead remains of these servants that were supposedly dismissed, they find numerous books on poisons and a series of lists divvying up the noble's estate between the two wives. And so you begin to get this proof that maybe they're trying to kill him. They've decided to stick in this together. If the wives discover that the PCs are onto him, believe they can salvage the plot by simply killing the party, they'll try to do so. And who knows what form that could take. The wives have similar skill sets, but they don't have to be identical, right? If the PCs manage to reveal the wives' plans to the noble first, the wives will do everything in their power to try and convince their husband that the PCs are lying in order to have them imprisoned or banished. And remember, he's pretty smitten with one or both of these wives. So that's the encounter. You got this wife who was using the nobleman for his money to further her own career. She disappears. He makes an exact duplicate, and then she reappears. And now these two wives are plotting against him, and he doesn't even know it. He's so besotted, and it's up to you guys to figure out what to do here.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's an interesting plot, interesting story, and one that doesn't seem like it necessarily has to have a lot of outcome on the rest of your story.
Right.
It can be pretty self-contained. Again, you can always weave it into a larger story, depending on who you make that noble or that wife, and where you plan to go with the rest of your campaign. Any thoughts or ideas as you listen to this, Adam, that you're like, okay, if I were dropping this encounter in, here's something that I think would be really interesting to highlight, to follow up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think having some extra, and this is speaking from like the style of game I feel like I find myself in a lot. Like, I feel like there's a ton of times, and be interested to hear. I think we're probably similar in this, but I don't feel like there's been a ton of times where there's a lot of random, not necessarily main plot moving forward things, like a random person kind of sends you a letter asking you for help, kind of thing, while you're in the midst of trying to, keep the demigod from destroying the world, kind of situation. Right. So I definitely would want to tie, that would be my personal thing, would be to tie some aspect of the main story, unless this is like a beginning thing. I think that could be a really interesting kind of beginning, early levels kind of situation when you're still trying to kind of figure out what the situation is. But again, that's me speaking from like a more epic arc kind of side of things.
Right.
I think it'd be fun to, maybe have the wives, if there's like even like a double cross kind of thing happening where they're doing this plan to work together, but they're still maybe looking for ways to take the other person out,
right.
It's like the thing where these people double cross this person, but then that person double crosses them to get the stuff. And so like, even if they're trying to win the party over secretly, maybe there's conversations happening where it's like, hey, I will make it worth your while if you do this thing, or, trying to diminish like the other entities, the other wives, like standing or something like that. I think that could be kind of a fun thing. But if they're trying to maintain their innocence, then maybe that's not the way to go for that.
I think so. Okay, I'm going to hit on a couple things if I can remember them, if I can keep them in mind. One, we talked about how we tend to go more epic. There are games that people run where it's just like, hey, this is more episodic, like a TV show, a sitcom sort of thing, where each each week or a couple weeks we do a thing, and then that thing gets done and we do another thing, and there's
Right.
not like some big huge at the end of the world thing. Some will be bigger, some will be smaller, but it's like a string of pearls. Everything's kind of about the same size. And this is the kind of thing Adam's saying we don't do very often, but I know some players and some tables that do. Hey,
Yeah.
we got a letter from this person. Let's go check that out. And then when that's over, it wraps up, and that doesn't necessarily continue to the next thing. That's not our favorite flavor. We love the things that build and build, and like you look back and you get all these clues, and things begin to take on more of a multi-session, we like that campaign to be like huge, epic.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. You may drop this in easily if you're doing kind of that, we're mercenaries and we just, whoever pays us, or, we just get these random things, and I'll throw out 3 different, people contact you and you choose one, and then you go from there. And this could be one of those.
Yeah.
But you can also tie it into an epic thing. Again, like he was saying at the beginning, this could be the thing that sets up the whole thing, it kicks it all off,
Right.
and somehow you guys were the ones that were contacted, and you've got to get to know each other. By the way, we did have someone kind of reach out to us. Chris Case talked about our feast episode, and just wanted to throw out there, and I thought this was a really good idea. I'm going to throw it in here. That idea that a feast can be a really good way when you're starting a campaign, and people got to get to know one another, and they were invited to this feast for whatever reason, or snuck into the feast. I like that he added that.
Yeah.
Or snuck into the feast for whatever reason, and then somehow you all end up together because of something that happens at this feast. So those beginnings are really interesting, and this could be a kind of beginning also. Now, the other thing I said I was going to keep in my mind. Got it. It was this. I think what would make this the most interesting sort of scenario for me is not one where you just find out the wives are trying to like plot to kill the husband, and then therefore they're bad and you got to stop them, convince him, whatever. I think more interesting to me is if these two were identical, and it was a case of, wait, which one's the real one? Which one's the good one? Which one's the bad one? And you had to figure out, and they were both playing it as though they were just trying to like entrap this person and get them caught in the plot, but they really loved the husband. But both of them, would pretend that, and you weren't sure which one was the right one. And is there a right one? Well, was the one who was using him for his money really never in love with him and just wanted his money, but the simulacrum truly loved him
Right.
because she was created that way? Or was it vice versa? The one who was the adventurer always found him as the solace, even though she was further in her career with her money, she still loved him.
Right.
And this simulacrum is just now wanting to like have her own life and is therefore plotting. Or are they truly plotting together? And you as the PCs don't know. You don't let on. You don't tell them this is actually the right answer, and then you have to do something about it. You make it a mystery. And I guess at some point you're going to have to decide, but you let your characters decide, are they buying it that one's good, one's bad, or are they buying it that both are bad? If they decide one's good, one's bad, how can they keep those two separate in their mind? How can they decide which is which? And then how do they convince the noble? And, I think that's where the fun for me, even though it said they don't have to be identical, for me, it's a case of, the 3 Spider-Men all pointing at one another, and you don't know which one's the real Spider-Man. That's here. The two women, the 2 wives. So yeah, I think that could be a fun little scenario to throw in there. And then again, depending on your campaign, maybe you have a villain, or maybe the simulacrum ends up being the good one and ends up helping you. Maybe they both die and she ends up being a benefactor. Maybe, who knows? It could be anything. So, find connection points, tie threads together, and drop this into a campaign, see what happens for you.
I find the dungeon with all of the undead and relics and all of that very interesting, and I think that could be a very nice tie-in to other things as well. As that almost stands out, where it's like, who was this person? Because I didn't have that sense of necromancy, I guess. It's like an adventurer. I guess there's no reason they couldn't be some kind of necromancer, but like I was like, whoa, that's a turn there when I read that. And but I think that's even like that is a good opening for future things too, of maybe there's a relic there that now becomes something they find and it's important. Like it needs to be destroyed, it needs to be taken back, it needs to be used. I don't know what that looks like, but I think that could be kind of an interesting tie-in to, and made it kind of more intriguing for me. I like your idea though, the making webs upon webs of things that you have to cut through to finally get. It's not so cut and dry of just they're both bad. They need to be
But
taken
I
care
think
of.
the
Done.
best
Like
the best part is like every time they think they got it figured out, you just pretend to be so innocent as whichever one you are. It's
right.
like, oh, I was the simulacrum.
Oh yeah.
But she invited me to stay in this room that is the nicer one. I don't know why, and that's the one you found going down to the dungeon. So you're like, well, obviously whoever's in that one is the bad one. But if she invited her in here,
Right.
and then oh, but no, the other one says no. When I was gone, he gave the room to her, thinking she was like going to be with him forever. And I
Right.
came back to the guest bedroom. It's like you don't know who to believe. And so it's real crazy, real fast.
That's good.
Yeah.
I like it.
All right. Hey, let's jump into our main topic of the day. We have been in this this 3-part series on planning, right? So we did the campaign, we did the planning of an arc, and now we're to how do you plan for the session you're doing tonight, and it's a little more concrete, but you're going to take in some aspects of things you have been doing for your other parts of planning. Adam, you actually have a game tonight.
I do. I'm
Why
hoping to
don't
get
you
some ideas
start?
for. Oh no.
Why don't you start by talking about like when you're getting a game for tonight,
Right.
what sorts of things, what's your process? What do you do first, second, third getting ready?
Yeah. So the as I'm like thinking, it definitely is going to depend. If you're sitting down and you're like, I'm going to make a session. I think it does depend on where you're at in the story, or like what we're in the midst of a longer term epic style campaign. That's going to look different from I need to plan this session that is supposed to just be tonight. It's a one-off. We're going to do this. Those, just to speak into that for a minute before I kind of talk more into my style, I think you have to be a lot quicker on the hits with those things and more minimal when you're thinking, I'm going to do this in like a night, which is a problem I always have with like one shots, is they always turn into 2 shots or more because I have too much story, and it's like, you can only have so many elements, kind of thing. But
Yeah, in that vein, when you're doing a one shot, a single session, or if it's a couple sessions, but it's a one shot, I do think you need to keep in mind what he said here. Your characters the hits have to be faster, and your characters have to be less complex. Everything is, I think, more black and white. There's going to be a good guy. There's going to be a bad guy. It's going to be a little more obvious. This is what we should do. That's the nature of a one shot. It's hard to get like super subtle and complicated and gray characters that people are figuring out are they good or bad when it's a one shot. That's something that happens when you're going to spend more time with your characters. So that is a good distinction. I like that.
Yeah. So I try to like work in more detail as I'm planning from less detail to more detail as I'm trying to plan a session. I don't necessarily work like scene by scene, detail everything out, and then move to the next thing. So a lot of times for me, this is another one of those, like, do I talk too much about tonight? But tonight, like the group is in a kind of a cavern area. They've been there for a while, standing before an avatar of a god, kind of thing. And so as I look at tonight, I'm looking around at that immediate area for the initial kind of thing. So I know that I want them to, like, one of the questions I'm asking, I guess I should say, is what's in that immediate area that they need to interact with, because I can start making kind of a checklist of myself of, okay, there's a trap over here. I want there to be a trap. Don't necessarily have to deal with that right now, but I know that I want that to be there. I want there to be a portal to another place, and I want these people to be here, or these enemies, those kind of things in that area. And I kind of like move out from there. So with that locational thing, the kind of questions I'm asking is like, what can they actually interact with on a reasonable level? Because there have been times where I plan like way far out, and it's like there's no reason to plan the barkeep in the city that's 500 miles away in game when they're not even going to get out of the room tonight, kind of thing. So trying to like work that out. And I know this cavern is on an island. There are certain things happening on that island. And if I don't already have them in my brain or down on my paper, I need to have some idea about like where those are going, like what are those entities doing, kind of thing. So that's one of the things, is just like what's in the immediate area is a question I ask. And I think that helps with like kind of having an understanding of what players may see, how they're going to interact with things, where that could go. I don't know that I feel like I need to have all of that fleshed of like, where does everything lead in that moment? But another question I ask is like, what kind of NPCs, what kind of characters are going to be important to connect with, or who do I think the players are going to think it's important to connect with? Because that is a very different thing sometimes, but trying to get in their heads a little bit of like, what's going to be interesting. So, if we're going into a town and I know that, the party always wants to go to the library in every town they ever go to, that's actually a fault of mine. I always want to go to the library in every town. But it's like, I probably should have some idea about if there's a library there, like what's a couple people they could engage with. So the thing for tonight, we're in kind of a weird spot where we're like mid conversation as we're starting.
I'm going to leave and go to the library. Right.
Yeah. You're going to go. There's a library. It's very far away. But those kind of like, who's it going to be important to? So for me tonight, it's like, obviously this avatar that they're standing in front of is going to be a decent conversation. So having a good idea of like motivation of what does she want? What does she need? What is she going to say? Which is kind of the third thing. Like a question I'm asking as I'm going into a session is like, what's going to purposefully move up the plot forward? Intentionally on my part, how can I move a plot forward? So that could be like something that the group sees or something that's told to them. It could be like a really overt thing is like, this avatar gives a quest tonight, or it could be something more mysterious that's plot forward. Like, let's go back to that encounter. They're dealing with these wives and this nobleman. You're down in the dungeon, kill all the undead, and you find this like orb that begins whispering to you, like that. That's a thing where it's like pretty subtle. You don't really know what's happening. It's a mystery, but that's the thing that could like move forward into more story. So I like to ask that question too, of like, what's something intentional that's going to happen tonight that's like going to help move things forward. So it's not just a kind of static, well, things happen, but I don't really know where it went, kind of thing. Cause I think that can happen sometimes too. So those are some questions. It's not so much the details yet that I'm talking into, but is that what's your like initial stuff, Matthew, as you're looking into a session?
Yeah. So let me try to stay where you're at here. I kind of made a list of kind of the levels I go down, and I think they're pretty similar. First of all, I do want to say that idea that you were saying, you need to be like, what's in this room, and then what's just outside this room, and what's here, not the barkeep 500 miles away. Have you guys ever played like these huge, massive video games where it covers 400 real square miles of space? The thing about a video game is the processing power is not there to keep that all fully rendered, and it doesn't.
Right.
It's where you're at is rendered, and if you move super fast, sometimes you get to a place that's less rendered, and then all of a sudden it like gets more rendered and looks more real. I think the same thing happens in gaming.
Yeah.
As a GM, we don't have the processing power to make everything completely all the time, realistic everywhere world, what we do is we follow our focus of our characters. And if they move really fast in a direction we don't expect, sometimes all of a sudden it looks a little
Yeah.
bit like less rendered, and then it gets more rendered the same way. But we do the same thing. We render where we are. It's what makes those kinds of games immersive, because you just keep rendering where we are. And so I like that idea. But my first step is I sit and think through the story. I always kind of look back to in my campaign, where were we going and
Right.
where have we been?
Mhm.
So you look at the huge broad, like, what is their overall goal? What are they doing now? That's the arc. And so I'll glance at those things. I don't have to like sit and read through every note I ever have about the campaign every session. Although when I'm hitting new arcs, I do kind of go back and detail what was my intention for this campaign. Am I still doing that with each of these arcs? And as I go through the sessions, I go back and I look at the arcs. I'm like, okay, what was my plan for this arc? Am I doing that? So that comes in to play a little bit. But I will look forward at my various story levels to see, okay, where exactly have I gotten to and where am I looking to go? And then the second thing is I want to like list my goals and my spotlights, right? So my goals, let's say we're in the cavern with the avatar. I can talk because I don't know any of the plans. So everything I say here is a total lie. But let's say we're in the cavern with the avatar of the god, and this thing just happened. What is my goal here? What is it that I'm hoping they get from this, or point to next? Or is it a conversation? Is it finding an orb that's whispering something to them? And then I also think, and so I'm thinking, my goals for this campaign are they're going to move from here to here to here, location wise. They're going to move from here to here to here, maybe thought wise, as far as like developing the story. And so I think one of our questions that we may get to a little later is how do you like plan in character development in your arcs? This is a place where I'm like, okay, who do I really want to spotlight tonight? And it doesn't always have to be just one player, but I will sit down and I'll say, you know what, Ben's character has been kind of quiet lately, and I really want to tie him in a little bit here. Here's something that's always been important to him, and I'm going to lay some of this stuff in here for him to find. Or, Chris's character has told me that he wants to do something along these lines sometime, and we're at a place where that could fit in really well. I'm going to like make a spotlight. And so I plan to spotlight one or two characters per session. Now, it doesn't always happen. There are occasions where I sit down and I'm just trying to get my monsters stats and I'm trying to get a map or two, and then we're going to go and see what happens because I didn't really plan enough time for my planning. But if I set my time right, I do try to think about spotlighting a character or two, because I do think, and I think you have to move that around. Do not fall into the trap of loving who this character is and just constantly spotlighting that one character while these three characters hardly get any airtime or feature time. You want to feature everybody. That's the best thing about being a really good GM, featuring everybody and making them feel like they're the star. Sometimes it was amazing for them. And that doesn't mean you ignore everybody else, but you do kind of highlight. So I'll sit down and I'll first think back and forth through my story. Where am I? Then I'll sit down and say, what are my goals for tonight? Location, story, and spotlight wise. And then I'll sit down and I'll just do, this is not like super complicated engineering, but I'll do like little flow charts. I'll sit and I'll do a circle. This is where they're at. Here's the three places they can go next. Most probable this one. If they go here, here's a box, and then they've got these choices. And if they decide to go to this one, here's a triangle. They do this, and then these choices pop up. And if they choose this crazy one, here's a circle, and then there's these choices. And then let's say we get in the game and they choose option 4. Well, there's nothing saying I can't take one of these three that looks the most probable and move that to option 4. They don't know what option 1, 2, and 3 were because they didn't select them. But if they do choose one of those things, I've kind of got my flow chart for not only how they get there, but then where that might lead to, just so that I can, again, begin to plant and drop things in that will happen future wise in the story. Because,
Right.
I've looked at my whole campaign, I've looked at my arc, and I kind of know this is the direction they're heading. These are some of the things they'll hit, but that stuff's not in focus. It's still pixelated very badly.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm drawing in just a little bit more definition on the places I think they could go next, and then I keep that moving with them. So, one, think through my story. Two, my goal spotlights and story. Three, my flow chart, and then I'm just going to go on with mine, and then you can kind of catch up to where I've gone. So next, I'll generally make a list of all the NPCs that they're going to encounter in this flow chart. Okay, so they're in this cavern. That's easy. They just with the avatar of the god and maybe this one guy who walks up. Again, there may not be a guy, but in
I'm gonna write that
story,
down.
yeah, there's a guy who walks up. Oh no! Then for each of these three places they could go, who are the NPCs they're going to meet there? What's their general like?
Right.
Who are they? What are they about? So I'll write those down, and then I'll write a list of like 5 names. I've learned to just keep 5 names handy on a piece of paper. A couple guys, a couple girls, and then when they like suddenly, I want to turn around and talk to that guy over there that you had not in focus at all. It doesn't look like you're quickly trying to render something. It automatically looks like you were ready for that. You're like, oh yes, that's, Gerber Fibbenstein, Gerber Fibbenstein, because you already had that name made up, and then you just start going with it. So I'll generally have 4 or 5 names for that person. They always pull out that I didn't expect to even be in the story.
Right.
And sometimes those end up being some of the most fun characters, right? Because on the fly, you create things differently than you do when you're playing.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
So I'll have my list of names, people, NPCs, and names. And then the 5th thing I do, and this sounds really regimented. It's not necessarily so, but I do find myself going through this process. The next thing I'll do is make sure I have pictures and maps. So, last week we were in this cavern and there was the avatar. I probably had those pictures last week. I'd make sure I still have those. But then I also think, okay, these are the 3 places they might go and the NPCs that might be in those places. Let's make sure I've got those pictures so I can, be ready. And again, this is different depending if you're on Roll20 online or if you're at the table. Because if you're on Roll20, you got to have it all loaded up. It's got to be there, or else you're spending a lot of time saying, hold on, guys, just a second. And you're like searching for a picture, trying to throw one in there. Best if you have time to like have those kind of ready to go and you can throw them up. If you're at the table, I still like to have pictures to put people in the general idea of where I want them to know they're at. You could just leave it up to their imagination, and I do that sometimes. But if I really want them to feel that they're in a murky swamp full of mist and darkness, I want to show them a picture of that to just get all their minds in the same place, and then they can picture the rest of whatever it looks like as we get to the place where I have a map. The maps online, you got to have a map. I mean, you don't have to. We have done it where we take and we draw a circle and we're like, okay, you're here. And there's guys coming from here, here, and here. And we draw arrows and then we throw in some tokens. You can do that. But again, if you want to have certain sorts of maps, and I will say online, there are just a plethora of maps. All you got to do on Google is go search for map of, and then whatever you're looking for, scroll till you find something that strikes your fancy, that kind of feels like what you're looking for. Grab that map. There is some technicality if you're on Roll20 to how to make the squares line up so that the squares on your picture and the squares for their movement line up. You don't have to have that, but if you learn that once, that's a good trait to get so that they can measure and all that kind of stuff. But so I'll get my maps and my pictures and that kind of stuff. And then at that point, I already know what kinds of obstacles I'm expecting them to face at some point during the night in one of these 3 areas. And so I will get my monster stat blocks. That's the stage when I get my monster stat blocks, when I start feeling like, okay, I am ready. Whatever else happens, I can flow with it, but I have these. And That has gotten easier for me. I think I've mentioned on here before that I use this program that will no longer work on the iPad. I don't think it's being updated at all on
Mm,
online, but that granted, I'm going to tell you, I run mostly Pathfinder stuff. So this
mhm.
works for 3.5 or Pathfinder. It was this app called Combat Manager. Loved it. Can't believe that the guy's no longer updating it, but I can kind of because, Wizards of the Coast and 5e, they're pretty stingy on how they let things go. Pathfinder was very open, which is the reason I used it so much.
Mhm.
But Pathfinder, he put in like all the monsters, people from just like campaigns, NPCs, all this stuff, and stat blocks with all of it. So, man,
Mhm.
I'm on the fly, and they're going through someplace I didn't expect them to go, and I'm like, man, what they need to fight here is some bat-like creature. I just type in bat, and then it lists everything that has bat in it,
Yeah.
and you can even select all levels, or you can select a certain
Mm.
CR level, and it'll put them all there. And then you just click on it and you look. And if it's like not strong enough or too strong, you can nerf it or you can increase it.
Oh, wow.
It's a
Yeah.
template and you can like raise it up in levels. You can drop it in levels just with a click of a button. And with that, man, my like freedom as a GM opened up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was great when I could use it on the iPad. Can't now because it just crashes, but I can still use it on the computer
Mm.
if I have a computer near me. And at the drop of a hat, I can be like, oh man, you guys go into this cave and you look up and, as I'm typing bat, I find, some thing and it usually has a picture there and it has a stat block. And I'm like, I start describing it
Yeah.
and then I make it happen and these things swoop down and everybody starts fighting them. And I can immediately see this is their armor class. This is what
Right.
their to
Yeah.
hit
That's cool.
is. And I didn't feel like it was strong enough. So I upped it by 3 hit dice level. And now it's tough for them to hit it.
Mhm.
And it's going great. And I even know that it has this special attack and it has, the stuff that makes a game feel like more than just like another orc comes in and hits you again with a sword and
Yeah.
then hits
Right.
you, or this thing comes in and bites you and bites you and bites you. You have some extra stuff in there. So
Mhm.
if you have something like Combat Manager, and I'm sure they have something like this for 5e, but I'm not I'm still that guy who hasn't paid for roll or beyond 20, like the full version where you can get
Mhm.
all that stuff. So I can't tell you. Adam can tell you because I
Yeah.
think he got it as a gift, maybe.
There is D&D Beyond. I still have the free version, but they have a beta. What's that called? It's a combat manager. I can't remember what it's called exactly right now, but that's helpful. It's not quite to that extent, but you can load.
The
Uh,
best thing ever is the ability in that Combat Manager to quickly raise the
mhm.
difficulty or lower the difficulty
Right.
of a chosen beast. That
Yeah,
was so
that is
great
cool.
because I kind of know about the strength of thing my characters can
Mhm.
and cannot overcome. And
Right.
so you don't, when you're first starting as a GM, you don't know. You'll be like, okay, you guys all walk in at level 1 and you find an Etten.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, because it's just going to cream all these level 1 characters. You don't know that. I remember that was the first thing my level 1 characters ever faced was an Etten.
That was
Now,
one of the
luckily,
scarier
it
moments.
it wasn't in battle mood, so
Yeah.
it worked out. But
Yeah.
later,
Yeah.
you get to where you can think about that.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah. A
sorry.
lot of.
I'm going to take a little break here,
Oh, that's
even
cool.
though I have just a little bit more. I'm taking a little break and let you kind of catch up.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I jumped past where you were talking about to the spotlighting stuff, but also then to the list of NPCs, to the
Yeah.
flow chart before
Mhm.
that, to the maps, pictures, and now the stat block. Anything you want
Yeah.
to talk about in there?
Yeah. A lot of that's, kind of my checklist going down, like the things you were saying for sure. One thing that I am trying to do better with and better with as I go and didn't do a very good job at first was in the like realm of the stat block, not just being like, okay, I need this, black dragon, because that's what we said was going to be there. And I have the black dragon sit over here. I've got it marked. I've got a bookmark in the monster manual or whatever. And then show up that night. Voomp. And worst is we just had a battle. It didn't go super well on my part. And then I realized, oh, I forgot like 7 special abilities that this thing had because I didn't read it right. And it's very simple, but just an encouragement to make sure you read the monster, if you're going to use it. I think it's like it should go without saying, but I don't know how many times I've in a hurry grabbed something and then not used it to its full potential just because I didn't read it well, and along those lines, if something has like magic, I think it's a super helpful thing to, if it's like it has these 4 spells, pull those spells up, get familiar with them before the middle of the battle, because that's another thing that can really bog stuff down. And I've been there, where it's like, oh, let me figure out these spells. What would it actually use right now? And if you've already like looked through those things, I think that's a big help to just like know it, kind of at least have a basic understanding of what's going on. So that's just kind of along with the stats. But yeah, I work through my maps. It's like, what if there's going to be combat that I think is going to happen tonight? What's there? I have a lot more freedom in person because I often have kind of a picture in my head, but I can like just draw. I don't usually come in with a map already drawn. It's like in the moment. But like Matthew was saying, like when we use Roll20, there definitely is a curve of like, this has to be done beforehand, or else we're just going to be sitting there while Adam like scrolls through files kind of thing. So maps, stats, pictures, same kind of stuff. Something that like you mentioned about spotlighting, which I love and I think is a really great tool, kind of triggered in our game. Like I actually had a call with Royal, who is one of our players on Thursdays last night. And we talked for a while about just some like character things. And I think that's a really good kind of part of the checklist in session planning is you probably don't need to have a 30-minute conversation with every player, every session, kind of thing. But I think there's some check-ins when maybe something story-wise is specifically happening with a player, and that's going to happen, to have a little bit deeper convo, whether it's like, hey, we're going to text each other for a while, or we're going to voice chat, or like whatever that is, to touch base and have a little bit more. We talk about that corporate like creativity, that cooperative kind of planning, world building and stuff. And I think that's a good way to do that, is just like be open with your communication about, hey, I'm kind of thinking about this, but what do you think? And how does this work? And do our like ideas kind of combine well here with this? So if you need to have a convo with a player, I think that's a good part of that checklist, kind of thing for sessions. A thing I'm chronically terrible about is loot. So I want to throw that out there out of my weakness of like, that's a good thing to know, if there's like a battle and there's like, if there is loot, if that's like a legitimate thing, like what is that? Actually put some thought into it and have some things listed out, because that's another thing where this is Adam confessing again a lot here tonight, it looks like. But it's like, I don't know how many times it's like, okay, you defeated the beholder, and well, what do we find? It's like 5,132 gold pieces.
The more specific it is, the more made up it is.
Piece of art. It's like, or it's like, how many are you? 5 of you? Okay, what's 5 divided?
5 times 5,000. Yeah. You find 25,000 gold pieces,
right? And we're gonna talk loot here, in the letters, I think. But I think that's a thing. Again, just I want to do better in of whether it's like resources like that, or even like a boon from someone, or what's the reward, even if it's not like this like tangible like gold, or diamonds. Like, is there something that's coming from this? And I want to know that, not like in the moment be like scrambling to figure out that kind of thing. So I'll kick it back over to you, Matthew, because I know you had some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, that kind of ties in nicely. My next step would be to look at props and notes. So anything that I want to be so special that they find, this goes kind of along with loot. Here's one thing I will go back and say, that Combat Manager, and I'm sure it is in modules. If you are following a module, you'll have like you come across some bad guys. The reason Combat Manager has this, they've incorporated stuff from tons of modules, and it'll say in there tactics. And so it'll say these three, centaurs are going to fight to the death, or it'll say, these will fight until their hit points get below 20, and then they will run off. And that idea of knowing how would these things act is kind of a neat idea too. Instead of just everything comes in and fights until you kill it. Some things are going to run away. Some things are going to lay down and beg for mercy. Some things are real. And so those tactics in that Combat Manager also, it typically says PCs will find on this character, a dagger, this much gold, and a note to so-and-so. And that can help. But like I have to think about, like in my personal campaign, obviously Combat Manager is not going to know any of the props or the special relics or stuff that I want to be found. So I'll plan, okay, this clue will be found in this person's, pocket, or in this dragon's hoard, or, whatever. And then also like little notes and stuff, like anything that, especially when we were sitting around the table together, I used to sometimes plan to have like a little note, and I would just throw that across the table at somebody and not say anything else about it. And they open it, and it's like, and then all of a sudden they look like they got a secret. Everybody wants to know what it is they have, and I just don't say anything else about it. And that can lend to some of the fun as well. So I typically go from my monster stat blocks to what kinds of props, notes, thoughts of treasure do I need to have. And then after that, for me, it turns to, there's three things. The last two things I think about are, hey, do I want to have any food here for people tonight? I've got a group of guys who all bring food, so I haven't had to think about that. When I first started, I used to actually try and think, oh, I should have some cool snacks and food and drinks and stuff. Now the guys all bring different things, and it's great. And sometimes they'll stop and get food on their way, whatever. So I've had less to think about that. And then the last thing I want to think about is my recap. I like to start each episode with a recap, reminding them this is where you've been, this is the thrust. And if you remember, like shows like Lost, I liked how, and this was like a good template for me, they remind you of stuff that happened in the past, but by what they remind you, what might be coming that's important, because they will select things that were like 4 episodes ago when she said this, and all of a sudden you remembered, oh yeah, there was something about a door with something behind it there, and all of a sudden they're like more alert to that. And so I think, thinking about like what kinds of things do I want to recap, not just for like the last battle, the last session they had, but things way back in the campaign that are like going to start, that I want them to be like front of mind thinking. So I'll think about that recap. But what I left out there was between thinking about the food and the recap. So I've read, I can't remember where it was, this one guy talking about his planning, and he says he'll get all this stuff in the morning. He'll kind of think through this stuff, and then he would take a shower before everybody would get together. I don't shower ever, so I didn't do that. That's a joke. But I didn't do it in the shower, but sometimes I would like take a little walk, and I like to just kind of like play the story of how I think tonight's going to go in my head, because I think one of the things that makes it the most smooth is when you're not thinking, okay, wait, what's next? Okay, you did what? Let me think here. Let me get my notes, moving stuff around. Like having that like flowing outline in your head of, here's the major events that could happen tonight and where I expect it to go, and kind of playing that through in your mind, just leisurely as you walk or shower or do something. And then, put it away. And when you come into that thing tonight, then you go with it. That's been helpful for me.
Yeah, for sure. Something I want to toss in real quick about this, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it triggered this for me. There's a blog called The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and I highly recommend it, like as a resource. The writer, I don't know if it's a group effort but they literally, it's just like tactics, and it's like breaking down a monster for the usage kind of thing. And I can't remember, even you said something specifically, about like they fight to the death or they run away, or, those kind of things. And I think that's like a really big help for those things. If you don't necessarily have, this is how I want to use them, that can kind of speak into it. So the
Yeah.
monsters know what they're doing is it's just an online blog, and it's been updated. Even I'm looking at it right now. 2 weeks ago, they made a post, and it's been going at least since 2016. So they have a lot of things in there you can work through. So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot of my planning for a session. I'm trying to think if there's anything I left out. I do try to strive, I talked about spotlighting characters, but one of the things we have on our sheet here is the idea of balance. I don't want, even if I'm spotlighting one character, I don't want one character to be the whole thing. And
Right.
I don't want one character to be able to do everything and other people
Right.
able to do nothing. So there is that idea of balance. And I do keep that in mind. And of course, different encounters that I'm going to plan a session will look different. So like if I remember one of my early campaigns, I had a night where I knew it was going to be tons of mental puzzles for people to have to figure out, or room puzzles for them to have to find triggers and traps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just the one guy who was doing everything and everybody else just kind of getting caught. So
Right.
even though I may be spotlighting a character to further his story, I want to think about how I can move between each of the people here and give them a moment of the night.
Right.
That's that idea of balance.
Yeah, that's good.
So, and of course, always keeping in mind, where am I aiming with my full campaign? With my full campaign, where is this whole thing going? That's got to be in the back of my mind.
For sure. Yeah, I think holding on to that arc planning and the campaign planning ideas, some of that in the back helps move that forward too. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Good stuff. Good talk here on session planning. We are going to move on to our NPC. I have something I have to be off of here at a certain time, but we want to make sure to get to this and a little bit to our mailbag. But again, if we didn't touch on something that you guys as a GM, you're like, hey, when I'm getting ready for a session, this is something that I always wonder about, or I don't know how to do very well, drop that in the haversack, riseofthegm@gmail.com, and we'll answer that. But Adam, why don't you take us to, by the way, I just want to let you know that Adam recently found out that he had somehow only been drawing from NPCs randomly, but they were all villains.
Yes.
And so starting January 1st, we're going to, we've kind of got them planned out here for the next couple of weeks. So we're still going to get some villains, but we will start getting some good and neutral people mixed in. So if you've been missing that and thinking, man, all these NPCs are just bad people, that's a mistake. That was our honest mistake. But let's hear our villainous NPC of the day.
Yeah, maybe the challenge is to make a villain not a villain, but it definitely makes sense about why everyone seemed like it was an encounter. It's like, this has an encounter attached to it. So yeah, you can decide for yourself what you want to do here. But this is Hardy Har.
Hardy Har.
Hardy Har, the jesting puppet master. Hardy is gaunt with greasy blonde hair that peeks out from underneath a traditional jester's cap. He wears a flashy jacket covered with bells and dozens of pockets stuffed with toys, novelties, and gewgaws.
I was wondering what you were going to say there. I looked at this description earlier. I'm like, what the heck is a gewgaw?
That's your word for the day. You can look that up online for everybody listening. As far as this role playing, quick with a tasteless joke or a body story, Hardy is constantly on, quote, on. He's sleazy and loud and more popular than he is funny. He's magnetic and energetic, and despite his crude humor, he easily works his way into the confidences of those that he entertains. As far as motivation, Hardy desires nothing more than to be the voice behind serious power. His popularity has been steadily rising for some time, and now he's constantly in demand, and he has the ear of quite a few minor politicians, nobles, and merchant princes. As he gains the trust of greater numbers of influential people, Hardy sets himself up as a secret and trusted advisor. He revels in acting as a puppet master, playing those who trust him against one another for his own benefit. Hardy's begun to set his master plan into motion, aiming his advisees against those he perceives as a threat and keeping an eye out for greater opportunities. This is Hardy Har. So yeah, we have somebody who's like behind the scenes pulling the strings, but I feel like we had one of those prior, but whereas that one was a little more quiet, this one's like so overt that it's like hidden away, kind of, it's like you're so out there that it's like not seen kind of thing. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I do like the kind of out there and always on nature of this character just because I think that's more fun to play. Sometimes when you try to play that secretive, kind of quiet person, your players don't get it. They just think you're just
Right.
sitting there waiting for them to do something, and they don't get. But it's hard not to get this guy who's like, "All right, stop me if you've heard this one. The god comes home and he finds his wife in bed with a baker, and here's the big part, or whatever."
Yeah,
it is.
right.
And I like the always on nature, the kind of constant, almost crude joking, but also this character who always seems to be like pointing out to people how other people have slighted them or how they might have, stolen the spotlight or cheated them or, whatever it is. It's like he's that guy in the office who always is like talking about people behind their backs, but always acting like, "Oh, no, it was just a joke, man. Hey, I didn't mean to ruffle your feathers or anything," that kind of guy. I don't know what I would do with this guy. It would really depend on my campaign as far as like how he would fit into a larger role.
Right.
I could see it. I haven't planned anything for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like some of the stuff could be in the background even. It feels like the type of person that would be, once again, like a foil against the PCs, just kind of like undermining them, or maybe Hardy starts to see like, oh, these people are kind of growing in power and influence, and maybe I want their ears too, kind of thing. But definitely that stirring the pot or making like kind of sideways comments that just kind of prick people, against each other. It seems like that's like what he's doing there.
And maybe he picks like one of the NPCs that he's like, I think this guy's got some power, and it's like kind of always kind of, sucking up to him.
Right. Yeah.
But he will kind of disparage one or two of the others a lot.
Right.
And maybe that shifts, maybe then at times, he comes up and he's like, I know I always say stuff about you, but I really do see that you're going to be the one who does this right here. And then later it's like, you constantly don't know if you can trust him.
Right. Yeah. This is not this at all, but this makes me like think about the Fool in the like Mad Ship and Assassin.
Yeah. The Robin Hood story.
You have like more understanding of that, but like, I'm kind of moving out of that, but how do you see like the Fool playing? Because there's some of that where it's like he's kind of a jester like person, right? But very wise and knows what's going on. And I don't know. I know that's probably been a while, but
the Fool, yeah, it's been a long time since I've read this. If you've read the Robin Hobbs series, The Assassin's Apprentice and following, it goes into the actual stories of the Fool, which I haven't read all of them, but like he's this character that is a jester, but you get the sense that he knows a lot more than anybody about what's going on, that he has this deep wisdom, but at the same time, it's always like kind of this joking, and you don't know like what is a joke and what is like something serious. He, with my little voice inflections here, I've made the guy I've been talking about almost like this dude from the Bronx, which he wouldn't be. This kind of fool wouldn't be that. Again, you could like kind of constantly shift people's perception between, is he really wise? And I don't always see it. Is he fooling all of us, or is he really just like a mindless jerk?
Yeah.
And I think it's fun playing with those perceptions and keeping people guessing. Every time they think they got it, you switch.
Right. Yeah.
they don't know. So that's
fun. Yeah, it's a fun one.
Hardy Har. He's Hardy in Har. There. I don't know if I would ever use that name. I told Adam, I don't know if I would ever use the name Hardy Har unless it was like his stage name or something, but maybe. But let's go on to our haversack and see what kinds of questions came in this last week and a half, since we've had a little longer between.
Yes. So we've got one that's been in here for a while, and Watai, I apologize that we've held off on it for a while. And it's about like the story arcs kind of idea. He says this. Sorry, this is the Haversack question. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Dear Matthew, note Adam should recuse himself from this question since it potentially concerns him. Nah, who am I kidding? He can listen. Also, my questions is kind of messy and long. So it starts with this. When planning out story arcs in your campaign, do you plan out character arcs for your PCs as well? If so, how do you go about that? He goes on, but you want to hang there for a second. So thinking about like story arcs for specific people, I feel like that's a really it's a developing thing for me where I don't start with a lot of plans unless they've given me a really good backstory, but it still feels like it's going to like evolve as time goes on. And it's going to be I was talking about having that like discussion with Royal. That's a thing where I wanted to hear from him some ideas. So I feel like that's very like developing for me, not like necessarily okay, for this arc, I want to do this, but I don't know. Matthew, what do you think with that?
It's a give and take. So the very first campaign I decided to run, I decided to make one guy the super important part, and his story arc was going to very closely follow the entire campaign arc. And then he quit playing a few episodes, a few sessions in, and I'm like, and so I kind of quit doing that where like one guy becomes like the key to the story. But at the same time, once we've been in a campaign for a long time, I get these ideas, and sometimes I will, it's something that just kind of comes up and I begin to do it with a character, like their kind of growth and story. Sometimes I still plan character arcs so like in my current campaign that we haven't played in a long time, let's just be real. The Dormant Mind, I have some parts of a couple characters that are going to like really be huge in the end, and hopefully will make them be like, oh my goodness, as they think about that. It's just going to kind of hit them like a 2x4 that all along they did not see this, and then here it is. And I can't wait for those things to happen. Can't tell you anything about them, but I do plan some stuff for character arcs long in advance.
Right.
And it's funny because those things do grow. The ones that right now I'm thinking of in particular were not there when I started this campaign, even though I knew the general arc of this campaign and where it would end up. It's just gotten better and better as we've gone through, and I see how characters react and the things that are important to them. And then all of a sudden everything starts dropping into place. I'm like, oh, this was going to happen, but now here's things that will make that so much heavier, so much more weighty in the end. And so when planning out story arcs, do I plan them? Yes. And I allow them to grow and change.
Yeah, right.
I know that sounds so much like what we say every week here. And how do we go about that? I didn't give you any really good steps, but I can tell you. And again, I've said this a million times. When I sit down with the paper, and I do this all through, I sit down and I'm like, okay, here's what's happened so far. What if when we get there, this is the truth? Oh no, that's stupid. Okay, what if we did this? And then, what if they find out this? And things spring to mind in those what if sessions that make me so excited to bring their character along in ways they have already been heading. I don't want to say your character is going to turn into this, whether you wanted that or not. Okay. Right. So if somebody decides that, hey, I'm just in it for the money and I want to get all I can get, and me be like, no, your character is going to be like, only caring for the good of others and sacrifice themselves at the end. That's not
Right.
going to work because that's not who they are already playing it as. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I follow their lead and I extend it.
Right.
And so you can't do it necessarily from the beginning. So when do I do that? How do I go about that? I watch them.
Mhm.
I get good senses of who they are. I analyze them. And then I
Yeah.
sit down and I what if, and I'm like, ooh, what if a character that acts like this was put in this situation with this conundrum?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, what if here? And then, I build that way. So
Mhm.
again, the what if and follow the character's lead. I guess
Right.
that would be
Yeah.
my how do I do it?
Yeah. Attached on that real quick as we kind of finish here. Wataya asked, do you pick a character per session arc that experiences growth or a character who would naturally fit in with the storytelling? And I think there's a little more to that question, but one of the things I do try to tie background in, even though I'm letting it develop and unveil. So like for my game, uh, Ozoff was a city guard and had some like beef with one of the captains, but also had a friend in there. And so when there was an arc that kind of took them into the prison system of the city, that was like there were connecting points that I wanted to make happen. Um, in this case, like where we're at right now, Matthew's character is it's kind of like a chase to find his brother. But there's connecting aspects to that as well as like Leonas's connection to his culture that are taking part in here too. And for all of those, it's like I kind of knew those, but I also want to see what people grab onto. Because if people are kind of like, oh, that's cool, and then move on, or have a discussion with somebody and then dismiss them or something, I don't want to keep like pushing them into like conversations with those people if it's not something they're wanting to chase, kind of thing. So so I guess it is a balance of trying to tie in the backstory or the things they've grabbed onto, but letting that unveil rather than pushing it down the line. So that's how I would answer that.
And I would say, pay attention to your characters. Like he was saying, not every character is going to grab on to the things that you're laying out there to
Right.
develop them. And that's partially because of how people have fun playing. There are some people that all they want to do is get into a battle and say some snarky remarks, and that's their whole joy in gaming. Then there are others who like long to have like this deeper meaning and like
Right.
find that their character is special in some way, and that probably has to do with the type of fun being
Yeah.
fantasy or something narrative, whatever it is. Play to those. I have
Right.
I have people that I try to like lay like cool backstories and development, and they just could care less. All they want to do is go in and do big hits and then say some snarky remark and go on. And I give them opportunities to do that. But there are, and it's generally more than one. You have some people who generally want to see growth and they want to see epic in their character. And those are the ones that you're really going to focus on with that sort of thing.
Right.
And that's okay. Again, you don't want to like never focus on the battle and the cool snarky remarks that this other guy's going to do. Give him his spotlight.
Right.
Just don't expect that it's going to be one of these things that necessarily goes as deep. And that's okay because that's where different kinds of fun happen.
Right. For sure. Yeah. Good.
And let's hit our last one. We've got one more question in the haversack.
Okay. So this was from Chris Case. Hello, Chris. Good to hear from you again. He said, "Hey there, gentlemen. I've really been enjoying the podcast. I've had some questions pop into my brain as I listen to each episode, but I tend to forget them when I go to write the email. I guess that means I need to go back and listen to each episode again." I love that.
Everyone twice.
I also wanted to say that I enjoyed the Special Feast episode. It really gave some great ideas to include in my campaign. So thank you for that. One thing I wanted to add is having a feast may be a great way to introduce your party to each other. Matthew brought this up earlier, and I think it's great too, as they were all invited guests or someone snuck in or they were brought together for some purpose. Or it may be, and this I thought was really cool too, it may be a good way to have a player whose character was recently slain introduce their new character to the party at a celebration for the sacrifice of the old one. Just a couple thoughts. That's good. And now for the question. how do you deal with currency in game? Do you use all of it, including platinum or just gold and silver? Is there much thought out into the economy of the world, or do GPs flow freely?
Okay, I guess I can start with this one.
Yeah.
Generally, currency in the game happens. So I typically, like, you guys find a bunch of gold. I typically talk in terms of gold, and then I don't care if they switch it to platinum to make it easier to carry. But occasionally I like to point that out. Not every time, because I think that can become monotonous and like, oh, brother. But like, if they find this, they're somewhere down in a cavern and they find this unusually large hoard of gold, sometimes I will make it obvious that you couldn't just switch that out for platinum right here in the cave. Yeah. And so you've got to carry this chest, 2 of you, because this thing is huge. Or you try to go out, each of you have 2 bags over your shoulders like a little Santa Claus, but they're super heavy because all they got in them was gold, and you're trying to go, and all of a sudden you got to fight something. What do you do with this gold in here? You got to drop it and keep fighting. Did it spill? You know, and just bring that to mind so it's a little more realistic. But on the whole, I let them like store it however they want. I do think there's something cool about the idea of when somebody's like, yeah, I get and, you know, as soon as we can, I go in and I do an exchange for rubies so that I can carry all this, and it's just in a little pouch instead of like having to carry all these bags, because most of our players don't even think about carrying their money. And so occasionally it's good to bring that to their mind. But just occasionally, because again, it can get really worn out if every time I'm like, oh yeah, and so now what do you do with all that gold on your back? And you're like, oh dang. Most people end up getting a bag of holding or a haversack, or have a friend who has one and they all stick it in there or something. But if they do that, sometimes I take advantage of that, and I'm like, okay, this dude gets knocked out and drug away, and when he wakes up, his bag of holding is gone, and everybody's like, oh no, that's all of our gold. And then what do you do? And so a new fight.
Pretty similar for me. I feel like wealth is fairly abstracted in my games. I don't tend to be super concerned about like carrying capacity. I don't want to get that crunchy typically with things. So I think if you want to do that, that's a good, like, one of those conversations at the beginning of the, session 0 kind of thing about like, hey, I'm thinking that this is going to be a little more technical. We're going to worry about weight, those kind of things. The first character I had in Dormant Mind that Matthew is running, I don't know why, but I got really interested in, like, I was super weak, and I'm like, I'm going to worry about carrying capacity. I can carry 7 arrows and 1/3 of a coil of rope. And like, it was like, I regretted it immediately, kind of thing. Cause it's like, I can carry nothing. And it was a self-imposed thing. Cause I remember you, Matthew, were like, you don't have to do that. I'm like, oh no, I do. I have horrible strength, and then I regret it. So a lot of abstraction, unless it's for like a purpose. We're talking D&D Pathfinder with this, I think, mostly, but something like Red Markets is like based around scarcity. Like, it's economic horror is like what that's called. And so with that, it's like, you got to be a little more particular about like the amount of monies coming to people, where the whole point is like, you may not have enough kind of thing. So that's definitely going to depend on the game. But I will say when I'm doing fantasy gaming, it's typically, I try to keep it even more carryable, unless, like you said, Matthew, like, is there a reason to push, like, this is going to be hard to get out of here? And I think that can lead to some really interesting things. But I probably wouldn't do it very often.
Another side of this question. So that was kind of the carrying, and do I allow them to kind of decide what that looks like? Here's another side of that. I've had campaigns, and this is kind of campaign based, but I've had campaigns where I've decided there's not going to be a lot of money in this world. They're just not going to get, I'm not just going to give them so much money that they can go buy every item that they want and have like super high skills because they all bought headbands of intelligence. And they all bought a belt of the giant and they all bought, and they have just like everything that they ever wanted every time they go into a town. And you can like, certain towns have buying limits and, I used to sometimes keep that in mind. It's like, okay, you can't buy anything over this in this town because it's so small. Oh, this is a bigger city. You can buy pretty much anything you want. But sometimes I just don't allow them to find much money. Even if they're leveling up with experience, I don't allow them to have a lot of money so that they can't just do all of that stuff. And then there are other times where even if there's money, I make it so that every magical item they could ever want is just not available. It's just those things don't exist in the world. Sometimes I make it so that the only magic items they can really get are the ones that they find, and that can be fun in some campaigns. In some campaigns, I'm like, hey, here's money, and there's magic items everywhere. Do your worst. So a lot depends for me kind of on the campaign.
Yeah. So, one of the combos we're going to have eventually is like low magic, high magic items, that kind of stuff. And I'm excited to have that combo too.
Right. All right. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us here on Rise of the GM. I think that's our last question from the Haversack, our last in the 3-part planning series. Next time, we want you to join us because we're going to have a special guest. Barry Hudek is going to come and talk about a game called Close Action. You'll want to join us for that because it's a different kind of game. It's a really fun kind of game. Join us next time here on Rise of the GM as we talk with Barry all about that. Thanks again, guys.